You know, we all have a street name. We probably don't think about it much. But what if your country decided to name every single street all at once? Well, today we're diving into the story of Ghana's ambitious plan to do just that. A plan that turned into a massive, high-stakes drama pitting ambition against chaos and culture.
I mean, just stop and think about that for a second. How do you even begin to name every single street in an entire country? It's a colossal task, right? You're not just tacking up signs, you're basically creating a brand new map for a whole nation, a system that could change how the country works from the ground up. So what happens when you try to pull it off in one giant push?
Well, you get this. In 2013, Ghana's President John Mahama laid down a wild ultimatum to all of the country's local chief executives: name every street, number every property, and do it in 18 months or you're fired. Just like that, this huge infrastructure project became a political pressure cooker with jobs on the line.
So you have to ask, why the insane urgency? Why risk so much political capital on something like street science? Well, as it turns out, the goal was about way more than just making it easier to find your way around town. This was about a fundamental leap forward for the whole country.
See, the potential here was absolutely huge. A proper, standardized address system meant ambulances and fire trucks could actually find you in an emergency. It meant businesses could deliver packages reliably, and for the government, this was the big one. It was a way to finally identify every property so they could collect taxes and actually fund better urban planning. This wasn't just about convenience. It was seen as a key to unlocking Ghana's development.
But even the best intentions can crash into harsh reality. And in this case, the president's command kicked off a frantic, chaotic race against time that put everybody on edge.
The timeline was frankly kind of crazy. The clock started ticking in March 2013, which gave officials until only September of the next year. That's a ridiculously short window to pull off a project this massive, especially one that had failed in smaller attempts for years before.
And yeah, the threat was very, very real. As that deadline got closer, the Minister for Local Government was out there in public hammering the point home. The message couldn't have been clearer. If you haven't gotten this done, it means you're incompetent and you will lose your job. No pressure, right?
But as all these officials were scrambling to meet the deadline, a much deeper problem started to surface. The plan itself. Well, as one governance expert put it, it was just completely disorganized from the top down.
Okay, so here is the central screw-up. On one hand, the president set up a national committee, making it look like this big, centrally managed government project. But then, in the same breath, he told all the local assemblies, the people whose jobs were on the line, that they had to find all the money themselves. This contradiction set off immediate and total confusion.
And that created this massive implementation gap. I mean, who's actually paying for all this? Where are the signs and the polls coming from? There was no clear unified policy. So the local assemblies were basically left to fight for themselves, which led to all sorts of arguments and basically stalled the project before it even got off the ground.
So while the government folks were bickering over logistics and money, an even bigger, more complicated problem was popping up on the ground. This top-down plan from the capital city was starting to seriously clash with the deeply rooted identities of local communities.
In some places, officials just started slapping up what residents called strange names. Get this, in the Gaw South municipality, streets were suddenly being called Artegas Street, Alpine Street, and even Watermelon Street. For the people who actually lived there, these names meant absolutely nothing. They had zero connection to their history or their culture. And this lack of consultation became a huge point of friction. Traditional leaders were, understandably, really frustrated. They argued that they had been totally sidelined. Street names are part of a community's story, and they felt like that story was being completely erased for names that felt random and meaningless.
And this is the really crucial part. This wasn't a blank slate they were working with. A lot of these streets already had informal, local names that people had been using for generations. So the project wasn't just adding new names. In many cases, it was erasing old ones. And that felt like a direct attack on their local identity.
So with all this logistical chaos, all this confusion from the top, and this growing cultural conflict, what do you think happened when the president's 18-month deadline finally came and went?
Yep, you guessed it. Despite all the pressure and all the threats, the deadline passed, and almost none of the districts had actually finished the job. The grand ultimatum, the big threat, had pretty much failed.
2 years later, people were calling the whole thing a street naming fiasco. Reports came out saying that not even half of the work had been done. The ambitious plan had just fizzled out, leaving this messy patchwork of named and unnamed streets all across the country.
But the story doesn't quite end there. In 2018, the government tried to learn from its mistakes. They issued a whole new set of guidelines to try and bring some order to the chaos. For example, they said streets should really only be named for people who have passed away, and that names have to be respectful and simple, a really clear attempt to avoid the cultural clashes that blew up the first time.
In the end, Ghana's story really shines a light on this universal problem. You learn that progress isn't just about big, top-down plans and scary deadlines. It's actually a delicate balancing act between the future a country wants and the past it comes from. And it leaves us with this really critical question. How does any nation build its future without paving over its past?